So first of all, thank you for agreeing to come on. And I would like to thank Nicole for setting this up as well. So I'm very excited to have you on, and you are dressed for the occasion, I see.
Well, grey, which is, the truth is always grey, it's neither black or white. And that's also
Okay.
something that we said in our election video, but it's just coincidental. I just grabbed a grey. But thanks, Walid, for having me on.
Oh, no
And
problem. It's my pleasure.
congratulations on your election commentary. I think many people thought that you did an excellent job with your commentary on election night.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So let's start off. Well, I don't know. I didn't mention this earlier, but before we get to the questions, I just wanted to say I think you are one of the most underrated MPs on the opposition side. I think a lot of attention is usually devoted to Mr. Pritam Singh or Dr. James Lim, and rightly so. They are incredible people in their own right, but I think somehow you do not get the media attention that you deserve. I think often what you say in Parliament makes a lot of sense. So hopefully you can share some of those ideas today. So the first thing I wanted to ask you on is the minimum wage, and can you explain in really simple and layman terms why the minimum wage is superior to what we have now, the progressive wage model?
So thanks for the question, Walid. Before I jump into that, just wanted to say that sometimes it's good to be underrated. I think it was George W. Bush who once said that he likes people to underestimate him.
And he definitely got his wish. People definitely underestimate.
Yeah, there was a lot to underestimate, some might say, but hopefully there's not a lot to underestimate. Right. But, so thanks for the question. Let me dive in. So what we have advocated in our manifesto and also in Parliament a number of times is a basic minimum wage for all Singaporean workers at $1,300 per month of take-home pay. Now, the government's model for dealing with this issue is the progressive wage model, where they go industry by industry. So they've done it with cleaners, with security guards, with landscaping, lift technicians will be next. So they take each industry in turn. They get the employers and the unions and the government around the table to try to work out, what is reasonable for employers to pay. It's a negotiation process, and they work something out. And whether, what they work out is fair, is good, that is up to the public to decide. But, you go industry by industry, it takes time to work out the negotiated solution. And when you look at the low-wage workers, there are actually a number of, the number varies from 32,000 to 100,000, depending on how you define it. But people who are earning 1,300 or less, depending on how you define it, take home versus basic, including overtime, including bonus, it's not a small number, Walid. It's not a small number. It's a large number of Singaporeans who, if you think about it, it is very difficult for them to survive in a high-cost country like Singapore with that low level of wages. And we asked the government in Parliament, how long would it take to implement progressive wage across all the sectors in this last mile effort, because there are many different sectors, and it can be quite fragmented. And not all these sectors will easily take to progressive wage model in the sense that, you need licensing levers, you need some degree of organization among employers to have a bargaining partner. So all these things need to be done. And they couldn't answer how long it would take. So what we are saying is that you can have a basic minimum wage that is across the board at 1,300 take home, and you can still work on the progressive wage model sector by sector to come up with wage laddering above that level, that is appropriate for different industry conditions. It's not an either or situation. Many countries have minimum wage. Of course, the argument is that it will kill SMEs, but really, if you look at the discussion within the business community, there was an article in Business Times about it. Many business leaders do agree, many entrepreneurs do agree that they have to pay a living wage to their employees to get employee engagement and commitment and productivity. And they do recognize that they have to move in that direction. And for us in the Workers' Party, we're not just calling for minimum wage. We have also called for many measures to help SMEs in terms of things like an Exim Bank, control over rentals, support for upgrading and productivity enhancement, and many different things. So it's a total package. We can't cherry pick one idea from the Workers' Party and say, oh, you're going to kill SMEs, because I don't think that you will.
Right.
And when they say that it may kill jobs, where's the proof of that? I think James Lim talked about many studies that have been done, including meta studies, to show that if you don't set the minimum wage too high, you do not kill jobs. You just get employers paying more to their workers, and then they will be nudged to try and upgrade the productivity to make that viable.
Right. So just to clarify, so you think the standard economic theory about how, minimum wage is a market distortion, right? So you do not think that will affect employment in any way, shape, or form?
Well, I think the experience of other countries shows that if you do not set that wage too high, it does not tend to destroy or to grow jobs. There is a lot of academic evidence out there because it's a subject that has been studied a great deal.
Right.
Most developed countries have some form of minimum wage,
Right.
and therefore economists and governments have studied this issue to find out whether, hey, if I remove the minimum wage, am I going to create more jobs? Because governments need to know that, right? If the minimum wage is something bad or negative, if I could remove it and create more jobs to soak up the unemployment, then many governments would want to do that. But because the evidence has shown that if you set it at a level that is not too high, you will not destroy jobs. So that's why minimum wage policies are found in many countries. And what is the level that is too high? There are different figures that different economists have postulated. I think there is one figure that some people use, which is about not above say 40% of the median wage. There are different figures out there.
Right.
But the level we have proposed is basic. It is not too high. We don't believe that there's any evidence that it will erode jobs. And Walid, they've also talked about how the progressive wage model is a consultative process with employers. Well, we can set a national minimum wage based on research that involves the element of consultation too. And we said that you can get employers around the table. And as I've said, from the discussions in the business community, I do sense that many entrepreneurs are open to this idea and feel that it's an idea this time has come.
Right. Okay. So not just foreign economies as well, even in Singapore, there's a healthy debate, I think. And Professor Linda Lim actually wrote an article advocating the minimum wage on academia.sg. So for anyone who's interested, can check that out. The title is "The Economic Case for a Minimum Wage." It's based on a podcast. Basically, it's an article on academia.sg. So can I just clarify why is it monthly? Why is the proposal monthly and not a minimum hourly wage? Because the danger with the downside of the monthly minimum wage, it excludes a lot of people from the gig economy. So this is a question by Daniel and Professor Yen Chong. So would an hourly minimum wage be better, or does the WP see that as a stepping stone towards an hourly minimum wage? What is the party stance on this?
So thanks, Walid. And I think that's a great question. So we framed it in terms of $1,300 per month take home, because that is a figure that most people will be able to understand and relate to as a reference point, so people can see, at what level it is compared to, salary benchmarks that they have in mind. But it's meant to be a reference point, so it can be worked, extrapolated, it can be translated into an hourly or daily rated kind of pay that is prorated to that basic level of 1,300 per month. So it's a great question, and I think any process to set a national minimum wage, which we are recommending to have a process that is consultative, that is fact-based, research-based, would have to take into account different kinds of income profile. Then some people are on daily rated situations or hourly rates as well.
Right. Okay. Thanks. So even though it is an economic issue, ultimately it is a political issue as well, right? All issues generally are political, especially if it's in parliament, it will be political. So politically, do you think, and this is based on Alfian's question in the comments, so do you think the resistance to minimum wage is simply because it comes from WP, and therefore would it have been better if it didn't come from WP? Because if it came from WP, maybe there is more reluctance on the government side to actually implement it. What do you think?
Well, Walid, that's another good question. I don't know. I think it's a question that should be perhaps asked of the PAP. They would know the answer to that question, because they know why they do things. I can't speculate on their intentions and motives, but I will say that in Parliament, the PAP ministers and spokespersons, including Senior Minister Taman and Minister Josephine Teo, if you look at the speeches that they made, particularly in September, they did say that the distance between the WP minimum wage proposal
Right.
and PWM is not a vast distance.
Right.
They're not radically different ideas, and PWM is a form of minimum wage. And there was some attempt at some times, like it seems to me, to try to project that there is not a gulf between these two positions.
Right.
But at other times, you do see and hear people talking as if there is a huge difference between these positions, and the WP's position is very dangerous. So I don't know. So at the end of the day, I think we have to ask the AP this question. What are the answers?
Right. And in fact, I think it's progress that you mentioned SM Tharman and Minister Josephine saying that the distance is not that. And in principle, there's agreement. I think that seems new to me as well. Just one final question on the minimum wage. How did, this is based on a commenter's question, how did WP decide that 1,300 is enough?
That's a great question. So we decided that based on the government's own figure for average household expenditure on basic necessities. So the latest figure for this AHEBN was given based on a parliamentary question I asked, I think in 2019, and that was 1,300 per month. And that was seen as what was necessary to support a family of four, just to cover basic necessities. I believe that excludes transport, so it's really very, very basic, it's very minimal. It's kind of a subsistence level. So we thought that we need some research peg, and it has to be research based, right? I think when we put across ideas, we have the responsibility to say that these ideas are good for Singapore. They are responsible ideas. If we were in government, those ideas would be workable. It would not have unintended consequences, bad side effects, cure that's worse than the disease. We have that responsibility. We take that responsibility very, very seriously in the Workers' Party. So we pegged our figure for minimum wage to that average household expenditure on basic necessities that the government itself has come up with.
Right, so $1,300 probably is close to we don't have an official poverty line, right? But you say it's close. That is.
We don't have an official poverty line, exactly. And in fact, some of my colleagues in the past did raise this, that we should have an official poverty line so that we can see how well we're doing, in the national effort to really lift up our lowest paid workers, our most struggling families. We should know what success looks like. We should measure progress.
Right.
And we should have a poverty line.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that was very clear, and I think people can make their minds up based on the different arguments, but I think the fact that we're having such a healthy discourse on this is progress for the entire country, I think. So the next question, based on a recent talk that Dr. PJ Tam gave, it was quite provocative in many ways, and it was basically, I think, a no-holds-barred talk, and he really was criticizing political parties throughout the spectrum, right?
And no-holds-barred like this talk.
This one is a bit milder, I think so.
No, some holds are barred.
So he said that WP is part of the problem and not part of the solution. So as a senior member of the WP, how do you feel?
Well, I think that Dr. Tam is certainly entitled to his opinion. That's the first thing I'll say. And I think we never shy away from criticism. Criticism and debate are healthy things. I remember seeing a lot of critical comments on my social media platforms, over the years, and even during the election. Sometimes I'll respond to some of the people who post such comments. I think that's healthy. Disagreement does not necessarily mean disrespect. So I think I would respect the views of people who say that they don't agree with us in the Workers' Party because we don't go far enough. And that is not a new position. I think various people and groups have taken that kind of position before. But Walid, how I would look at it is this way. I think for us in the Workers' Party, we take our responsibility as a party in Parliament very, very seriously. So any ideas we put forward, any positions we take, have to be implementable, have to be workable, have to be responsible. They would be ideas that we would be able to take up and implement if we were in government. We do not say things for the sake of posturing. We do not say things to play a brinkmanship game just to score a point, and then later on we will turn around and say, oh, actually we didn't really mean that, just saying it just to get some support from certain segments. I mean, that is not the game that we play. So we look at society, politics, the economy, the realities of Singapore. We look at where we are, and then we look at where we would like to go, and we figure out how do we get from A to B. How do we move ahead? How do we move forward? And for a political party like the Workers' Party, which has to represent broad mass of people, has to speak for different groups of Singaporeans, represent the interests of different constituents, has to be a national party. For a party like us, I think we have to look at how we get from A to B, and that process may not involve taking 100 steps ahead of what the society is ready to do, what the society is ready to move with and support. We have to make our case, persuade people to support our ideas, and we have to take a stepwise approach and support ideas that can move us in the right direction towards the kind of ideals that we have. So taking 100 steps ahead of society and saying, hey guys, you've got to catch up with me, that is fine. That is the role of the activist, I would say. That is the role of civil society. And that's an important role. That's a very important role. Every healthy society has to have a healthy civil society, has to have activists who try to change public opinion and mold public opinion.
So activists must be to the left or to the right of political parties, based on what you say, because political parties would tend to cluster around the center, and then activists needs to be a bit more controversial, or activists need to be a bit more controversial or a bit more bold. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is activists can afford to go 50 steps or 100 steps ahead of what society is prepared to do. Political parties have to carry the society with them. So we will need to say, hey, we're going to take a few steps ahead, and we need to convince the majority of citizens to follow us. And then if we can convince them to do that, then maybe in future we can take another few steps and convince them, and so on and so forth. And that's how we move from A to B. But you can have political parties who represent people, the majority, and then you can also have activists and civil society. In my speech in September in Parliament, I try to put up a very forceful case, for the importance of an independent civil society. I said that government funding support for civil society should not be seen, in any way tied to civil society groups not criticizing the government, for example. And that's very, very important. So I hope that we will have an even more. In fact, I think Singapore has some way to go. We need to have more space, more support for civil society groups, financially and otherwise, to come up with independent research and ideas, put their case to the public. So that is the complementary role I see between parties in Parliament and civil society and activists.
Right. Thanks for that. So I think I mentioned this just before the elections. For instance, I think some politicians maybe need to be clearer about their role and whether they see themselves as activists or politicians. But that would be assuming that there is a dichotomy between the two, right? So in episode 3, I had a discussion with NMP Ms. Kwek Xiao Yin on this, and I asked whether politicians and parliamentarians, should they be followers of public opinion or should they shape public opinion? And she said obviously it's both, right? What do you think based on what you said? So it seems to me that you're saying that parties should be reacting and reflecting public opinion more than shaping public opinion.
I think that you have to do both, and it's a very, very important point. So what I was trying to say just now about the metaphor of going a few steps ahead of society, it's really about having your ideals and having your vision and your principles. And I think that's what we do have in the Workers' Party. If you look at what we've been doing and saying over the years, we've taken very principled positions, even on civil liberties issues, political issues. We argued against the government's stand on POFMA, for example, and in our manifesto we talk about media freedom, about institutional independence. So we have principled positions, but it's really about having to carry the society with you, and therefore you may not be able to to run ahead of public opinion too far, but you have to take a stepwise approach and say, what, if we were to become the government tomorrow, what is implementable right now in terms of what we can get everyone on board with, what is fiscally and sustainable in other ways than fiscally, and what can we really implement. And it's a question of how do we get from A to B, So a political party has to seek to make gains, seek to do things that are practical, realizable, seek to carry the majority of people with you, whereas an activist does have the role, I think, in most cases, to not be limited by that, and they can go ahead and actually try and change public opinion and take 100 steps ahead or 50 steps ahead. And that is as it should be,
Right.
I think society needs both.
Right. And thanks for acknowledging, and I think you are basically showing how we should be dealing with criticism, and even though I think Dr. PJ Tam was forceful in his criticism, I think you're acknowledging that he has a space to do that, and there's a point to what he's saying, and there's a role for people like him, because I do think it's important for people to be as critical of the opposition as they are of the government as well. So it keeps everybody on their toes, I think. So thanks for that.
Absolutely. I love criticism. Right. I think without criticism and debate, we can't move forward.
Right.
The truth is actually the product of disagreement and debate. That is how you really find out what the truth is.
Right. I don't love criticism, but I think it's necessary. Yeah, I think it's necessary. I mean, I don't like to criticize, but I know that it makes me a better
one of the things
person.
I like to say, to the teams that I work with, is that if everyone is just agreeing all the time, either everyone is not thinking, or everyone is not caring about the goal or the mission, or both.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I think that's such an important point. The fact that people criticize means they care on some level at least, and that needs to be acknowledged. So the next one is PM Lee's characterization of opposition voters. Well, he didn't say all opposition voters, but it seems that he's referring to some or many opposition voters who are free riders. And he's saying, as long as we have those, and how he's defining the free riders is people who want a PAP government but want an opposition presence, right? So they'll vote for the opposition in the hope that there'll be enough people who vote for the government. So they basically, you can have your cake and eat it. So what do you think? Do free riders exist? In Aljunied GRC, the 60% of voters free riders?
Well, I have spoken to a lot of constituents in Aljunied GRC and also some from Sengkang GRC, because some people from Sengkang also come to Aljunied, some of the coffee shops in Serangoon. And all of them felt very strongly that they were not free riders at all.
Right.
And I will tell you my take on it now, and I'm broadly in agreement with them. I think that you have to respect how voters want to vote. I mean, you need to be committed to build a democratic society. That means that people have the right to choose. And I think the people who vote for the opposition, you could make an argument, as PM Lee made, that they are free riding because they depend on other people to vote for the PAP as a government. But at the same time, you could turn that around and you can make an argument that some of the people voting PAP are also free riding on those who are voting for an opposition, because some of those PAP voters don't want a 100% PAP parliament. They recognize that that's a bad thing, that you need some balance and some competition. So they're depending on voters in other constituencies to vote for the opposition. And many PAP voters and supporters that I've spoken to, on the ground and in other capacities, do tell me that they don't want 100% PAP parliament, or even a political situation where one party is just overwhelmingly dominant and there is no balance, there is no alternative party that can be an insurance policy for Singapore. The PAP could fail. I think many PAP voters and supporters do get that, and do feel strongly about that, and I've been told that by some of them, on the ground. So you could say that, you can make an argument to say that, well, these PAP voters are also free riding on those who are voting for the opposition. I would never make that argument. I would never, none of us in WP or, I think anywhere else would really make that argument. I think you can't categorize people as free riders. What we have to say is that we have to respect how people use their vote. And some of the constituents I spoke to, they said that, well, we voted for Workers' Party this time. If the WP doesn't do a good job, we'll vote for another party. Next time, that's our right. That is our sovereign right. And I think if anyone wants to come up with the criticism to say that, oh, it's very wrong how you voted, then, are you really respecting the electorate? Are you really respecting the democracy and by extension, the country? For me, I believe that the Singaporean voters do vote rationally and sensibly. At the end of the day, whatever the political outcome we get, I think will be the result of a conscious, deliberate, well thought through collective choice, made by the voters. And if you look at past electoral outcomes, that, the evidence really seems to support that. People use their votes in a careful and considered way. So I think we have to respect that rather than label people.
Right. I guess I completely agree with you. But if I just were to push you a little bit on the point, right? It is true that majority of Singaporeans do want the PAP to be the government, right? So in that sense, PM is not wrong factually, right? In the sense that there are people who vote for the opposition while hoping or wanting the PAP to be the government, right? So he's not wrong just on that regard, in that regard.
Well, I would say that many of the people I've spoken to who vote for certainly the Workers' Party, because on the ground I will interact with many of them, they believe that Singaporeans will exercise the vote rationally. So they believe that their fellow Singaporean citizens in other constituencies will vote for parties that are responsible, or vote for parties that are electable, that are credible, that have credible leaders and candidates who will make good MPs. And they trust their fellow citizens in other constituencies to not vote for parties that are not credible and so on and so forth. So when they vote for an opposition party like the Workers' Party, they have that trust and, I suppose you can call it faith or confidence, in their fellow citizens that, the outcome that comes out will be a rational one and one that is good for the country. So it really goes back to whether you believe that the voters are capable of making this kind of decision. And I certainly believe that they are. Many of the voters who voted for us believe that as well.
Right, and I personally agree with you, and I would say that if voters have voted, they have voted, right? I mean, you cannot agree with the results in one election and disagree with the results in another election, right? And also, just the political science literature is full of this in terms of tactical voting versus sincere voting, and this is what you get in plurality of first past the post systems. You'll get tactical voting. In proportional representation systems, you are going to get people who will vote for a party that is closest to their ideology. But in first past the post systems, people vote slightly differently. So I mean that's the system, and it really shows what you're saying is in fact quite true, right? Because voters are extremely conscious and rational about the value of their vote. Right, they know exactly how to maximize the gains within the system with their particular vote.
Yes, absolutely. And I think if you have faith in the Singaporean voters that they will do that, and I certainly do, then you also have to acknowledge that whatever is the outcome that comes about, Singaporean voters would have voted in credible candidates. And we have confidence in our institutions of states, that our institutions of state will work with whatever parliament has been decided by Singaporean voters, and our institutions will continue to function. And the leader of the opposition, Pritam Singh, actually quoted from Mr. Lee Kuan Yew some words exactly to that effect. If you have confidence in the people, you believe our institutions will function, then, why do you want to second guess that?
So I didn't have this question, but now that you mentioned the confidence in the people, right? I mean, you're an economist, right? And what about the collective action problem? The tragedy of the commons, and what about all of that, where everyone does the rational thing and an outcome which is not beneficial to society would ensue? So basically, what I'm saying is, how should we have ultimate trust in people to do the right thing, considering everyone is rational?
Well, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I like to think I'm an economist, and so I'm familiar with things like the tragedy of the commons that you mentioned. And economic arguments are very much in vogue just this past couple of months, I think.
Right.
And I think basically the beauty of democracy is that it is a self-correcting system. It's a flawed system, but as many people have said, it is the worst possible form of government, with the exception of every other known form of government, because you can say that people do make mistakes and people exercise their vote foolishly, but then the question is, who knows better?
Right.
Do we trust some
exactly.
benevolent aristocratic elite, which is
exactly.
I think was the vision of people like Plato and so on? You have the philosopher kings.
Right.
But really, I mean, how do you know that the philosopher king won't get it wrong or won't govern in the interests of him and his family? And I think societies have been through this road. That's how and why industrial developed countries have some form of electoral democracy. Electoral democracy can correct itself. Sometimes it goes wrong, but very often you find that the people do reflect and correct it when something counter to what people really wanted comes about.
Right. So that's an excellent point about the self-correcting mechanism inherent in democracies, or elections at least, which is not present in other systems, right? So you have the ability to act on your buyer's remorse, for instance, whereas in other systems you do not. So let's move on to carry on. Yeah,
that's one quick thing. So that's also a weakness of an authoritarian
exactly.
system. So some people make the case that, hey, you should give up all these rights and freedoms and political liberties in exchange for economic goods, in exchange for money, in exchange for a better life. But the problem with that, if you give up your political freedoms to a party or a group in exchange for economic benefits, and the economic benefits stop coming, you will not have the power to do anything about it.
Right.
So that's the limitation of those who champion a more authoritarian model. So.
Right. I absolutely agree. I mean, and I do not disagree with the argument that authoritarian governments are more efficient. They are designed to be efficient, right? A dictatorial government would be the most efficient, just one person deciding. But efficiency doesn't mean you get the optimal outcome. So the next one is about polarization, because some people have said that Singapore society is becoming more polarized, and it's not really good to have more opposition parliamentarians more opposition parliamentarians, because the discourse would get more heated and people would be trying to score political points, and you do not get to solving real issues. So what would you say to that line of critique?
I would say that having a one-party dominant system doesn't mean that things are less polarized, because in a developed society, people are going to have their own views and they should have the right to express their views. And if you have one party kind of dominating and controlling everything to a very great extent, does that mean that you will get unity?
Right.
No, I don't think that necessarily follows. That may mean that actually opinions are suppressed.
Right.
And so that you get the veneer of unity. You get what seems to be like a unified, not polarized kind of society, but that may just be through fear, through dominance, through suppression. And that's not ideal, because that is not real unity. That is, in fact, polarization. And if you look at examples of very authoritarian types of societies in the past, like the Soviet Union and so on, there was a lot of polarization below the surface for a very, very long time. And at a certain point, it just exploded.
Right.
So very authoritarian systems where, one group is very dominant are not good at dealing with diversity. I think real unity comes about when you have a democratic society where people can express how they feel, they debate, they discuss, you get an outcome. Not everyone is happy with the outcome, but everyone is happy that the process is a legitimate one. That the process is a democratic, legitimate one. The party I wanted may not have won, but I will support the institutions. And I think that is a much stronger, much better unity. And Walid, the other thing I'll say about polarization is that the people get the polarization they deserve. So I think most Singaporeans don't want to see a very polarized politics. So if you look at the parties in parliament, I would say that the parties in parliament are generally not trying to polarize the society. I mean, certainly I can speak for my own party, the Workers' Party. we are not a party that tries to pit one group against another. We try to come up with solutions that speak to different groups in society and have something to say to many different segments and groups in society so that we can move forward together. We don't believe in the brand of politics where you pit one group against another in order to get political points. We say, how can we, build that unity that we need while uplifting those that need more help, addressing injustices and concerns and so on and so forth, but not in a way that is bitterly divisive, not attacking particular people or groups. That's a style of politics we champion, and I think that that is probably the style of politics that most Singaporeans want to see, in the parliament, and in the institutions.
Right. I think you're right on that. That's the kind of politics most Singaporeans want to see. I will not ask you which parties you think are polarizing, and maybe there aren't. Maybe you don't think any are. So just before we get to the final question, I didn't ask. There were a couple of questions in the comment section with regards to the minimum wage. What about the foreign workers? Because I feel like they've been for the longest time a neglected part of society. So the minimum wage, $1,300, does that apply to foreign workers, or would there need to be further discussions for foreign workers as well?
Well, for foreign workers, you have work permits, you have employment passes and special passes. So employment passes and special passes do have a minimum wage, so to speak, actually a mandatory wage floor.
Sure.
So you are talking about just work permit holders.
Yes. Yeah.
So for the work permit holders, I think they are a different part of the labor market, and they are highly regulated based on quotas and based on levies. And most of the resident or Singaporean labor force does not compete for those same jobs. So we think that the foreign workers should be under that sort of regime where it is a highly regulated kind of sector. But Walid, having said that, I think for us in Workers' Party, we do believe that more can be done to improve the well-being, rights and security, and even mental health of our foreign workers. And Workers' Party MPs have spoken about this in Parliament. We've raised suggestions, we've filed questions. I filed a question about what are we doing, can we do more on the taking care of the mental health of our foreign workers living in dormitories in September. So that is something that we are very actively engaged in. We have filed a full motion in Parliament today to talk about some of the issues arising from the Party Liani case in a more broad and general sense. And that includes, the access to justice for the most vulnerable in our society. That includes foreign workers. They are hard done by when they're in a situation where they need recourse. Do they have access to justice? That's one of the issues that we are going to bring up.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So, final one, and I think this is a big one. So, as a minority MP, and actually you are the majority in your GRC, right? Your GRC team. The Chinese are the minority, Gerald and Muslim. So, but in general, you are a minority in Singapore society, right? So, is there a difference, a minority MP and a Chinese MP? Do you see a difference? Do you think there should be a difference? So there are multiple layers to this question.
Well, I think I'll not be able to talk to my colleagues, Sylvia and Gerald, in the same way again after listening to you. Now you made me think I'm in the majority in the Aljunied GRC. But I think to answer the question, it's an important question. And I think we always go back to what is said in our pledge, regardless of race. So I think the key here is that, we have to, there are two things. There are really two moving parts here. One is that we have to look at every citizen as a citizen, and we should not label and pigeonhole people too much. So, for example, if you look at the leader of the opposition, but I'm saying, he is a member of a minority community. Did the Workers' Party believe that made him unsuitable or ineligible, to be the leader of a party? No, we did not, evaluate the person, based on what they've done, their character, their attributes and traits. So I think that is important. But at the same time, we have another very, equally important thing, which we must have diversity. So we should, in our institutions, reflect the diversity of our society. And I think people from different ethnic groups, and also people from both genders, men and women, people from different walks of life, people from different backgrounds, all bring something. They are able to speak about, their experiences. They are able to give a perspective from their particular community. And while all of us are members of different communities and we have different identities,
Right.
and probably every one of us is a minority in some sense.
Right.
If you really go down and look at all the
Right.
different identities, whether it's in terms of your PWD status, or the socioeconomic group that you're born into, or the language that you speak at home. I mean, everyone is a minority in some way, and I think what we have to make sure is that there is sufficient diversity, and we can have rational debates and disagreements about what the best way to bring about that diversity is. But I'm sure all of us can agree and can be on the same page that you have to have that ethos of regardless of race, but you also have to have that ethos of diversity makes us stronger.
Right.
And our democracy has to reflect everyone in it in order to be strong and resilient. The moment our democracy starts to become unpegged from certain groups become disenfranchised, they feel that the political outcomes don't reflect them, they have no buy-in into that, that is when everything will start fraying and kind of falling apart.
Right. I think that's an excellent elucidation. Do you think the GRC is the mechanism via which you maintain this balance between equality of citizens and looking beyond race yet acknowledging race at that time, at the same time? Because it's not an easy balance to have, right? So do you think the GRC is still relevant? I know the official stance of the party is that you should return to SMCs. But my worry is what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and then DPM Goh Chok Tong, now ESM Go, said that eventually you will get a situation, or you may get a situation where minorities are not elected, and the possibility itself, is that enough to justify the existence of the GRC?
Well, we, as you alluded to, Walid, we don't support the GRC institution. Our manifesto position is that we should return to single seats, and that is a better and more direct kind of representation. That is a better kind of representative democracy, because there are various distortions that the GRC system introduces.
Right.
But I think the key question here, Walid, is really we have to go back and examine this assumption about whether people are voting along racial lines. Is there evidence that people are going to vote along communal lines and racial lines, and therefore certain ethnic groups will be excluded? If you look at elections, there are many examples, and there have been examples even going back to the past, but many examples recently where a candidate from an ethnic minority group won over a candidate from the majority group. I probably won't cite the examples. I think you know them better than me, like you're a political scientist. And I think you've all these. Maybe you can cite some of them later. You can list them all out. But there are many examples, Walid. I think we all know that. So I think that is a conversation we can have nationally. If there is evidence that we see people voting along ethnic lines, and let's have a frank national conversation about that and talk about what is the right institutional solution to that. There are different models around the world. Right. There is a particular approach taken in Mauritius, for example, that was discussed in Parliament in 1988 that is different from the GRT approach. There's an approach taken in New Zealand, for example. And we can have that, but it really goes back to, is there a problem to be solved here? What is the problem statement? Do we feel that as people we are voting along racial lines? If there's evidence, let's talk about it. But I think more fundamentally, let's also make sure that doesn't happen. If people are voting along racial lines, that means we fail as a nation. We fail to build that national culture. We fail to live up to the ideals of the pledge, and that's a far bigger problem, actually. That more fundamental, I would say, more fundamental problem that needs to be tackled at the root. I'm not convinced, Walid, that is a problem that we are facing right now. Of course, some people may say that there is an over-optimistic view, but is there evidence that people are voting along racial lines? It really comes down to that, and if there is, then we have to tackle that root and branch.
Right. I think it's very difficult because to ascertain for sure, no matter what other surveys we have, because Firstly, there's social desirability bias in the surveys. And secondly, people do not only vote on race. Even if they do vote on race, that's not the only thing they vote on, right? Ultimately, the party credibility and candidate credibility would matter more than anything else. But what if race is a factor, is not the factor, is not the turning point, or is not the most important factor, but it is a factor. And I don't know. I mean, I think that at the moment there is not strong evidence that racial voting takes place, but there is evidence that race is a huge factor in society, right? I mean, minorities are still subject to just casual racism, for instance. So is it fair for people to extrapolate that? And you know, the PAP's stance on the GRCs, I think, is highly rational, right? I think it is intended to protect minority representation. Of course, it has the effect of benefiting larger parties as well. I mean, that's for sure. But I think the intent of protecting minority representation is there. And if societal racism still takes place, would it be fair for them to extrapolate that to the electoral arena?
Well, you know, Walid, I think that there's no question that discrimination is a reality. There are different kinds of discrimination.
Right,
I
right,
think many
right,
ethnic minority Singaporeans would have faced
right,
different forms of discrimination in the job market, which matters a great deal to your life prospects, or even, you know, microaggression in
right,
everyday life and so on. And those are real issues, and they really have to be tackled. And there are, you know, different solutions for that. But I think when we talk about getting representation in parliament, that is a very, very specific kind of a question. You know?
right.
So is the GRC the best solution to that? Is there a problem that needs such a drastic or such a you know, distortionary kind of solution? Or, you know, is that problem really not there to that extent? You know,
Right,
that
right.
we have to depart from single seat, you know, SMC, first past the post kind of a system that you see, you know, in so many other countries, that does not necessarily lead to lopsided
Right,
racial outcomes. I mean, look at the UK, for example. I mean, they have
right.
single seats, they don't have GRCs. You have a Chancellor of the Exchequer, you know, who is an Indian.
Right, right,
And I think if my memory serves me well, I think the previous one was also
right, right,
Indian with ethnic minority.
right.
In Canada, you know,
But
for example, you have a lot of ethnic minorities too.
but they don't have the ethnic integration policy, right? So they, for instance, in UK, you have districts that are 95% or 90% Muslim, for instance, right? In Birmingham or in parts of East London, majority Muslim, and chances are you're going to get a Muslim MP there. And then you get in North London, you have areas which are majority Jewish or a sizable Jewish population at least. So they still have the communities living in those areas, but we do not have that. So basically, my own take is that the GRCs are still relevant, but we could reduce it to just a maximum of 2% to solve the unintended effects of the GRC. So let's say you have about 25 seats based on GRC, so 25 times 2, so it will be 50, let's say, and the other 50 all can be SMCs. Would that be a reasonable compromise, do you think?
Well, you know, personally, Walid, I would say, and I've come across this idea before. I didn't realize you were you know, one of those championing it. So it's good to know that. I should have known that actually, but I didn't.
No, it's
No,
okay. You don't have to.
I would say that I would say that it's definitely you know, in my personal view, an improvement over these
Right.
mega GRC that we have with 5 persons or 4 persons or 6 persons. That helps to, you know, manage some of the distortions that we see. You know? But I'm not convinced that that is necessary to do that. I think ethnic integration policy, yes, we've had that, but you know, private estates do not have ethnic integration
Right.
policy.
Yeah.
We
Sorry.
have a very terrible situation in private estates, not
Yeah.
necessarily. Even going back to our discussion on the UK, I don't think it's always the case necessarily in UK or Canada or Australia that, you know, a particular seat where you have a majority in one community always returns an MP from that community, and communities that have a different majority would never vote for a minority. I'm not sure that's the case. I'm not sure you can see a very definite pattern that way. So I think it really comes back to, you know, is it proven that people are really gonna vote in this way? And I think if it's proven, we know that that is really the case, which I'm skeptical about. I don't think it's proven.
Right.
But if that's the case, then that's a conversation we can have about what's the best way to deal with that.
Right. And also this election, I mean, in your own GRC, three minorities, and I mean, Mr. Murali and SMC, but many minorities were actually leading GRC. So it's not that they were riding on the coattails of their Chinese colleagues, but it was the other way around, right? You saw, for instance, SM Taman or Minister Shanmugam. You have Minister Masagos. You have a lot of minorities who are leading GRCs. And as you rightly said, I think no one really sees L.O. Pritam as a person from a minority community. They see him as a national figure, as is the case with SM Taman as well. So maybe I think a lot more discussion needs to go into the GRC system. Even though in principle I'm supportive of it, I think the data that we have from this election at least has made me reconsider my stance at least. So, Mr. Leon, do you have any other things that you want to get off your chest that you want to say?
Walid, I always have many things I want to get off my chest. I think I also respect your time and the time of your audience. You know?
Okay, so final one. Who would you suggest I get on the show next time? Other than SM Taman and L.O. Pritam, of course. Everybody wants them to come on. Who do you think I should get on?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you put me on the spot there, but maybe, you know, a younger Singaporean, I think, you know, be an activist.
Oh, okay, interesting.
You know, in a particular cause.
Right.
I think that, you know, I always feel very hopeful when I see younger Singaporeans are really going out on a limb and doing something for the society rather than just, you know, looking at their own bread and butter issues. And there are many examples of that. So, you know, you have your pick, and I'm sure they all love to be on your show.
Okay. There's a bit of an exaggeration, but thanks for the.
You have a way of persuading people, right? Very confident in you.
So on that note, can you get the young Singaporean Nicole Sia to come on?
I had a funny feeling you were going to say that. That's why I didn't say it. I knew you were going to say that.
All right, Mr.
See what I can do.
Thank you so much. That was a pleasure. And sorry we exceeded the time, but it was definitely one of the best conversations I've had. Thank you so much for your time.